I'd been working in the warehouse of Harrison Manufacturing for 3 years when my sister Victoria became CEO. She got the promotion at 29, while I was 32 and still loading trucks in the distribution center. At least that's what everyone thought I did. Emma's doing well in her little warehouse job, Victoria told our parents at Sunday dinner 6 months ago. It's good she found something she can handle. Not everyone is cut out for executive work. Mom nodded sympathetically. We're just glad you're employed, sweetie. After you dropped out of business school, we weren't sure what would happen to you. I smiled and passed the potatoes. The warehouse keeps me busy. What they didn't know was that I'd left business school because I'd already built something bigger. While Victoria was finishing her MBA and networking at country clubs, I'd been quietly acquiring shares of Harrison Manufacturing through a series of shell companies and trust arrangements. The warehouse job. That was my way of watching the business from the inside, understanding every operation, every employee, every weakness in the system. Harrison Manufacturing was our grandfather's company. He'd founded it in 1987, building industrial components for automotive manufacturers. When he died 5 years ago, he'd left equal shares to his 3 children. My father, my uncle Robert and my aunt Jennifer. Together they owned 60% of the company. The remaining 40% had been held by various investors and board members. Or so everyone thought. Over the past 4 years I'd systematically purchased those shares. A retiring board member here, a frustrated investor there. I'd used money from a tech startup I'd sold in my early 20s. A company I'd built while wasting time on computer stuff, according to my father. The sale had netted me $47 million and I'd invested it carefully, quietly and strategically. The shell companies had names like Meridian Holdings LLC and Cascade Investment Group. Nothing that would raise suspicions. Nothing that would connect back to me. My lawyer, Richard Chin, had structured everything perfectly. On paper I was just Emma Harrison, warehouse employee. In reality I owned 82% of Harrison Manufacturing. I'd been waiting for the right moment to reveal it. And then Victoria handed me that moment on a silver platter. It started at the quarterly shareholders meeting 3 weeks ago. These meetings were usually formalities. Reviewing financial reports, approving budgets, discussing strategic initiatives. Family members always attended, even though most of them didn't understand the numbers. I arrived at the conference room on the executive floor at 9:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the meeting started. I was wearing my usual warehouse uniform, jeans and a Harrison Manufacturing polo shirt. I'd come straight from my morning shift, still smelling faintly of cardboard and machine oil. Victoria was already seated at the head of the table, reviewing documents with our father and uncle. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "Attending the shareholders' meeting," I said simply, taking a seat near the back of the room. "This meeting is for shareholders and executives." Victoria's voice had that condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. "You're neither." "Actually, employees are allowed to observe," I replied calmly. "It's in the company bylaws. Section 7.3. My father frowned. "Victoria's right, Emma. This isn't really appropriate. These meetings discuss sensitive company information." "I have security clearance," I pointed out. "I work here." Uncle Robert laughed. "Let her stay, Victoria. What's she going to do, leak our manufacturing costs to competing warehouse workers?" The room filled with chuckles. I smiled and said nothing, pulling out my phone to take notes. The meeting proceeded normally for the first 30 minutes. Financial reports, production numbers, client contracts. Victoria presented everything with practiced confidence, highlighting the company's 12% revenue growth under her leadership. Then she reached the main agenda item. "As you all know," Victoria announced, "we've been approached by Titan Industrial Group about a potential merger. They're offering $340 million for complete acquisition of Harrison Manufacturing." The room buzzed with interest. That was nearly 3 times the company's assessed value from 2 years ago. "I've reviewed the terms extensively," Victoria continued, distributing folders to everyone at the table. "Everyone except me. This is an exceptional opportunity. Titan wants to integrate our manufacturing capabilities with their distribution network. All current shareholders would receive cash payouts based on their ownership percentages." My father leaned forward. "What about the family legacy? Your grandfather built this company. And now we have the chance to cash out at peak value, Victoria replied smoothly. The business landscape is changing. Competition from overseas manufacturers is increasing. This merger would secure our financial futures while we're still in a strong negotiating position. What about the employees? I asked from the back of the room. Victoria barely glanced at me. Titan has assured us they'll retain 70% of current staff. There will be some redundancies, of course, particularly in administrative and warehouse positions. Of course, I echoed quietly. Uncle Robert was already nodding. The numbers are impressive, Victoria. You've done excellent work here. I propose we vote on accepting Titan's offer, Victoria said, her confidence radiating across the room. This requires approval from shareholders holding at least 51% of company stock. Between Dad, Uncle Robert and Aunt Jennifer we control 60%. More than enough. She clicked to the next slide, which outlined the voting timeline and approval process. Any questions? Victoria asked, scanning the room with a satisfied smile. I raised my hand. Victoria sighed. Emma, this really doesn't concern warehouse staff. I have a question about the approval process, I pressed. The approval process is for shareholders to decide, Victoria said firmly. You can return to your shift now. We'll handle the business decisions. I'd like to stay, I replied calmly. You have no authority here, Victoria declared, her voice sharpening. You're just a basic employee. These decisions are made by people who actually have stake in the company's future. My father nodded in agreement. Victoria's right, sweetheart. Why don't you head back to work? We'll fill you in on anything that affects your department. I stood up slowly, gathering my phone. Understood. I'll wait for the official documentation then. Good girl, Uncle Robert said dismissively. As I walked toward the door, Victoria called out, "Oh, and Emma? Let's keep discussion of this merger confidential. We don't need warehouse gossip spreading rumors before the deal is finalized." Of course, I said and left the room. Behind me, I could hear their excited conversations resuming, already calculating their projected payouts. I returned to the warehouse and spent the afternoon loading shipments, thinking carefully about timing. Victoria was moving fast on this merger. Too fast. She wanted to finalize the deal within 30 days, before anyone could raise complications. The problem was that she'd never actually reviewed the complete shareholder registry. She'd assumed the ownership structure was exactly as it had been when our grandfather died. 60% family, 40% various investors and board members. She had no idea how much those percentages had shifted over the past 4 years. That evening I called Richardson, my lawyer. They're moving forward with a merger vote, I told him. Victoria thinks she has the approval authority with the family's 60%. But she'll need documentation from all shareholders, Richard replied. Once they start the formal approval process, our holding companies will receive notification. That's when they'll discover the real ownership structure. How long until that happens? If they file tomorrow, probably 3 to 5 business days for the documentation to process and distribute. Perfect, I said. Let them start the process. I want this completely official before the reveal. Are you sure? Richard asked. This is going to cause significant family disruption. I thought about Victoria's condescending smile, my father's dismissive pat on the head, Uncle Robert's mocking laughter. I'm sure. The next week, Victoria was practically glowing at Sunday dinner. The merger is proceeding beautifully, she announced, refilling her wine glass. Our lawyers are processing all the documentation now. We should have final approval within 2 weeks. How much will we each receive? Aunt Jennifer asked eagerly. Victoria pulled out her phone, displaying a spreadsheet. Based on current ownership percentages, Dad, you'll receive approximately $68 million. Uncle Robert, $68 million. And Jennifer the same. I'll receive my executive bonus package worth about $4.2 million, plus stock options. Mom gasped. $68 million? It's a solid deal, Dad said proudly. Victoria negotiated excellently. I was setting the table, arranging silverware carefully. Congratulations, I offered quietly. Victoria finally acknowledged my presence. Don't worry, Emma. Titan is retaining warehouse workers. Your job should be safe at least for a while. That's a relief, I replied evenly. Though you might want to update your resume, Uncle Robert added, chuckling. These corporate acquisitions always mean eventual restructuring. Best to be prepared. Good advice, I agreed, placing the last fork. Mom patted my hand sympathetically. We'll help you if anything happens, sweetie. That's what family is for. I appreciate that, I said and meant it. They genuinely believed they were being supportive. The call came on Wednesday afternoon while I was operating a forklift in the warehouse. My phone buzzed with Richard's number. I parked the forklift and stepped into the break room for privacy. The documentation just hit, Richard said. Harrison Manufacturing's lawyers received the official shareholder registry this morning. All the shell companies are listed, along with their combined ownership percentage. And I prompted, though I already knew. 82% of Harrison Manufacturing is owned by Meridian Holdings, Cascade Investment Group, and 3 other investment entities, all of which trace back to you as the beneficial owner. Victoria's lawyers are currently trying to figure out who these companies represent. They should connect the dots within a few hours. What about the merger approval? Dead in the water without your signature, Richard confirmed. You're the majority holder. Nothing moves forward without your explicit written consent. I felt a strange calm settle over me. What happens next? Victoria's lawyers will contact you directly once they realize who owns those shares. Probably by end of business today. You should prepare for significant family reaction. I've been preparing for 4 years, I replied. The call came at 4:47 p.m. Emma Harrison? The voice was professional, confused. This is David Kellerman from Kellerman & Associates. We represent Harrison Manufacturing in the Titan Industrial merger. Yes, I said, still wearing my warehouse gloves. We've encountered an unexpected situation in our shareholder documentation review. Several investment entities hold majority ownership of the company, and our research indicates you're listed as the beneficial owner. Is this accurate? Yes, I confirmed simply. There was a long pause. Ms. Harrison, are you aware that you own approximately 82% of Harrison Manufacturing? Yes. Another pause, longer this time. I see. Ms. Harrison, the proposed merger with Titan Industrial requires approval from shareholders holding at least 51% of company stock. As the majority holder, your signature is required for the deal to proceed. Were you aware that this merger was being proposed? I attended the shareholders' meeting, I replied. I'm familiar with the proposal. I see. David Kellerman sounded like he was recalibrating his entire understanding of the situation. Ms. Harrison, I'm going to need to schedule a meeting with you to discuss this matter formally. This is highly irregular. The CEO and current board were not aware of your ownership position. I'm available tomorrow morning, I said. 9 a.m. works for me. Yes, that would be acceptable. I should inform you that I've already contacted Ms. Victoria Harrison to explain the situation. She's requested an emergency board meeting for tomorrow at 9 a.m. as well. Perfect, I said. I'll be there. I could hear him shuffling papers, still processing. Ms. Harrison, I have to ask, why were you working in the warehouse if you own the company? Research, I replied simply. You can't understand a business from the executive floor alone. See you tomorrow, Mr. Kellerman. I ended the call and returned to my forklift. My phone started ringing at 5:03 p.m. Victoria. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was brief. Emma, call me immediately. There's been some kind of mistake with the merger documentation. Call me now. At 5:17 p.m. my father called. Then Uncle Robert. Then Aunt Jennifer. Then my mother. I silenced my phone and finished my shift. At 6:30 p.m. as I was clocking out, Victoria's BMW screeched into the warehouse parking lot. She burst through the door, still wearing her executive suit, her face flushed with anger and confusion. Emma, she shouted across the warehouse floor. What the hell is going on? I removed my work gloves slowly. You'll have to be more specific. The lawyers called me. They said some investment companies own 82% of our family's business. They said those companies are yours. That's impossible. It's not impossible, I replied calmly. It's accurate. Victoria stared at me. What are you talking about? Meridian Holdings, Cascade Investment Group, Summit Ventures, Northern Capital. Pacific Trust. I counted them off on my fingers. I've been acquiring shares for the past 4 years. Currently, I own 82% of Harrison Manufacturing. That's insane, Victoria snapped. You're a warehouse worker. Where would you even get the money? She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. Your tech company. The one Dad said was a waste of time. I sold it for $47 million, I confirmed. I invested the proceeds strategically. Harrison Manufacturing shares were undervalued and available. So I bought them. Why? Victoria demanded. Why would you do this secretly? Because I wanted to understand the business completely before anyone knew I had control, I explained. I wanted to see how it actually operated. I wanted to know every department, every process, every employee. You can't do that from the executive floor. Everyone performs differently when the owner is watching. Victoria shook her head, still processing. This is ridiculous. You can't just, we're in the middle of a merger. A $340 million deal. I know, I said. I was at the shareholders meeting, remember? You have to approve the merger, Victoria insisted. The family is counting on this. Do you have any idea how much work I've put into negotiating this deal? I have a very clear idea, I replied. I've reviewed all the documentation. You've done excellent work. Victoria's expression shifted to relief. So you'll sign off on it? No. Her face went pale. What? I'm not approving the merger, I said calmly. Titan's offer undervalues the company, and their retention plan would eliminate 30% of our workforce. That's 127 people who would lose their jobs, many of them supporting families. The numbers look good for shareholders, but they're devastating for employees. Emma, you can't be serious, Victoria said desperately. This is a $340 million offer. For a company worth substantially more if we execute the right growth strategy, I countered. I've spent 3 years studying every aspect of this business from the ground up. I know exactly what Harrison Manufacturing is capable of, and selling to Titan isn't it. Victoria's shock was transforming into anger. You have no idea what you're doing. You've been loading boxes in a warehouse while I've been running this company. You've been managing operations, I corrected. That's not the same as understanding the complete picture. You see quarterly reports and board presentations. I see the machine operators who've developed efficiency improvements that never get reported up the chain. I see the warehouse workers who've identified supply chain optimizations that could save $3 million annually. I see the entire ecosystem that makes this company work. This is insane, Victoria repeated. You can't just block a merger because you have some fantasy about worker empowerment. I'm not blocking it because of fantasy, I replied evenly. I'm blocking it because I own 82% of the company and I don't approve of the deal. That's how ownership works. Victoria pulled out her phone. Dad needs to know about this. I'm sure he'll find out tomorrow, I said. The emergency board meeting is at 9 a.m. I'll see you there. I picked up my backpack and walked past her toward my car. Behind me, I could hear her frantically calling our father, her voice rising with panic and disbelief. I arrived at the executive conference room at 8:50 a.m. the next morning. This time I wasn't wearing warehouse clothes. I'd chosen a tailored navy suit, professional but not ostentatious. My hair was pulled back neatly and I carried a leather briefcase containing 4 years of documentation. The conference room was already full. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flanked by our father and Uncle Robert. Aunt Jennifer sat across from them. David Kellerman, the lawyer, was reviewing documents with 2 associates. 3 board members I recognized were present, along with Harrison Manufacturing's CFO and COO. Everyone stopped talking when I entered. Good morning, I said pleasantly, taking a seat. Victoria's expression was a mixture of anger and anxiety. Let's get started. David Kellerman cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on short notice. We're here to discuss the Titan Industrial merger proposal and the recent discovery regarding majority ownership of Harrison Manufacturing. He gestured to me. Ms. Emma Harrison currently owns approximately 82% of company stock through various investment entities. Any major corporate decision, including the proposed merger, requires her approval. My father was staring at me like I was a stranger. Emma, is this true? Yes, I confirmed. How? Uncle Robert demanded. Where did you get that kind of money? I sold a tech company 4 years ago, I explained. I invested the proceeds in acquiring Harrison Manufacturing shares from various sellers over time. What tech company? Aunt Jennifer asked, confused. CloudBridge Solutions, I replied. I built it during my early 20s. We developed inventory management software for mid-sized manufacturers. I sold it to a larger tech firm for $47 million. The room was silent. You never told us, Mom said quietly. You never asked, I replied. You assumed I dropped out of business school because I failed. Actually, I dropped out because I was already running a successful company and didn't need the degree. Victoria found her voice. This is irrelevant to the current situation. Emma, you need to approve the Titan merger. This is a family decision. It's my decision, I corrected. I'm the majority shareholder. You can't just block this deal because you're upset about being excluded from meetings, Victoria snapped. I'm not blocking it out of spite, I said calmly. I'm blocking it because it's a bad deal for the company long term, and it's destructive for our employees. David Kellerman intervened. Ms. Harrison, perhaps you'd like to explain your reasoning to the board? I opened my briefcase and distributed folders to everyone present. These are my analyses of Harrison Manufacturing's actual value and growth potential. I've spent 3 years working in every department. Warehouse, production floor, quality control, shipping. I've documented efficiency improvements, identified cost-saving opportunities, and mapped out a 5-year growth strategy. The board members began flipping through the documents, their expressions shifting from skepticism to interest. Titan is offering $340 million, I continued. That's based on our current revenue of $127 million annually and a standard industry multiplier. However, with strategic improvements I've identified, we can increase revenue to $210 million within 3 years. That would value the company at over $650 million. The CFO looked up sharply. These efficiency projections, are these realistic? They're conservative, I replied. I've personally identified $3.2 million in annual savings through supply chain optimization alone. The machine operators have developed modifications that could increase production capacity by 18% without additional equipment costs. Quality control has a backlog of process improvements that were never implemented because management was too focused on quarter-to-quarter thinking. Why weren't these reported? The CEO asked, looking at Victoria. Victoria's face was flushed. Warehouse workers and machine operators submit dozens of suggestions every month. We can't implement every random idea. These aren't random ideas, I countered. These are practical improvements from people who actually do the work every day. I've vetted every suggestion, run the cost-benefit analyses and prioritized implementation. The ROI is substantial. One of the board members, Margaret Chin, was nodding slowly. Emma, you're proposing we reject a $340 million immediate payout in favor of a growth strategy that might yield higher returns in 3 to 5 years? Yes, I confirmed. And I'm proposing we don't eliminate 127 jobs in the process. Those employees represent institutional knowledge and operational expertise. Losing them would damage our capacity to execute the growth strategy. My father was still staring at me. You've been planning this for years. I've been learning the business for years, I replied. I wanted to understand what Grandpa built. I wanted to know if it was worth saving or if selling was the right choice. Now I know, it's worth saving and it's worth growing. Victoria slammed her folder shut. This is absurd. You've worked here for 3 years in the lowest level position, and now you think you can make executive decisions. I own 82% of the company, I said simply. I can make any decision I want. That's how ownership works. Dad, say something, Victoria pleaded. This is our family legacy. We can't let her destroy a $340 million opportunity. My father was quiet for a long moment, studying me. Then he asked, Emma, what's your plan if we don't sell? I'm implementing the growth strategy, I replied. Starting with the efficiency improvements and expanding our client base. I'm also restructuring the executive team. Victoria's eyes widened. What does that mean? I met her gaze directly. It means I'm taking the CEO position. The room erupted. You can't be serious, Uncle Robert shouted. This is insane, Aunt Jennifer agreed. Victoria stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. I've been CEO for 2 years. I've increased revenue by 12%. You can't just take my position. I can actually, I said calmly. As majority owner, I have the authority to appoint executive leadership. Victoria, you've done good work managing operations, but you don't understand the business from the ground up. You see numbers on spreadsheets. I see the people and processes that generate those numbers. David Kellerman interjected carefully. Ms. Harrison does have the legal authority to restructure leadership as she sees fit. This is a hostile takeover, my father said slowly. Of your own family's company. This is me taking control of the company I own, I corrected. I've been patient. I've been quiet. I've watched and learned while everyone dismissed me as just a warehouse worker. Now I'm ready to lead. Margaret Chin leaned forward. Emma, what role would Victoria have in this restructuring? Victoria can remain as COO, I offered. She's good at operations management. But strategic decisions will go through me. Victoria's face was scarlet. I'm not staying as your subordinate. That's your choice, I replied. But the CEO position is mine. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. David Kellerman outlined the legal procedures for my formal assumption of control. The board members asked detailed questions about my growth strategy. My father sat silently, processing everything. Finally, Victoria stood up. I resign effective immediately. Victoria, my father started. No, she cut him off. I'm not staying in a company where my younger sister, who spent 3 years loading boxes, suddenly becomes my boss. This is humiliating. The severance package will be generous, I said calmly. And I'll provide excellent references for your next position. Victoria grabbed her bag and walked out without another word. Uncle Robert and Aunt Jennifer followed her, both muttering about family betrayal and legal challenges. My parents stayed. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked quietly. About the tech company, about the money, about buying the shares? Would you have believed me? I replied. When I left business school, you assumed I failed. When I took the warehouse job, you assumed it was the best I could do. Nobody asked if there was more to the story. We should have asked, Dad admitted. I'm sorry, Emma. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from any of them. The Titan deal would have given us $68 million each, he continued. You're costing us that money. Short-term, yes, I agreed. Long-term, your 18% combined ownership will be worth substantially more. But it requires patience and trust. Dad looked at me for a long moment. You really think you can grow this company? I know I can, I replied. I've spent 3 years preparing for exactly this. He nodded slowly. Your grandfather would have liked this. He always said the best business leaders work every position before they lead. That's why I did it his way, I said. Over the next 6 months, I implemented the changes systematically. I promoted 3 machine operators to the newly created Efficiency Innovation Team. Their process improvements increased production capacity by 22%, exceeding my projections. I reorganized the warehouse operations based on insights I'd gathered while working there. Shipping times decreased by 31%, and customer satisfaction scores jumped significantly. I hired a new VP of operations, someone who understood both executive strategy and floor-level realities. The CFO, who'd initially been skeptical, became one of my strongest allies after we implemented the supply chain optimizations. First-year savings reached $4.1 million. I reached out to 3 new major clients that Victoria had deemed too small to pursue. Their contracts added $18 million in annual revenue. Victoria took a CEO position at a competitor. She announced it on LinkedIn with a barely veiled comment about companies that value proven leadership over nepotism. Uncle Robert and Aunt Jennifer threatened legal action for 2 months, then quietly accepted their ongoing dividend payments. My parents attended board meetings and watched everything unfold. Dad admitted 3 months in that he was impressed. Mom started telling her friends her daughter was a CEO, finally proud instead of sympathetic. The best moment came 8 months after I took control. I was walking through the warehouse, still my favorite part of the company, when Marcus, one of the forklift operators, flagged me down. Ms. Harrison? Got a minute? Always, I replied. What's up? It's about the loading dock workflow, he said, pulling out a hand-drawn diagram. I've been thinking about how we could reduce the turnaround time for outbound shipments. I studied his diagram carefully. It was brilliant. A simple reorganization that would save approximately 15 minutes per truck. Marcus, this is excellent, I said. Can you write up a formal proposal? I want to present it at the next operations meeting. He looked surprised. Really? Ms. Victoria always said we should stick to our assignments and leave the planning to management. Well, I'm not Ms. Victoria, I replied. The best ideas come from people who actually do the work. Always have. Marcus grinned. You know, some of us wondered why you worked down here for so long. Now it makes sense. You were actually listening. Always, I confirmed. That evening I sat in my office, Grandpa's old office, and reviewed the quarterly projections. We were ahead of schedule. Revenue was up 34% from the previous year. Employee retention had increased. Client satisfaction was at an all-time high. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Board meeting next week. Margaret Chen says your numbers are impressive. Maybe you knew what you were doing after all. I smiled and typed back, maybe I did. Out my window I could see the warehouse floor below, the production lines humming, the shipping trucks loading. Every part of this operation I knew intimately. Every process, every person, every possibility. Victoria had seen a $340 million exit strategy. I had seen a $650 million empire waiting to be built. And I'd been right. The family business was in good hands. My hands. The hands that had loaded boxes, operated forklifts, studied every detail and waited patiently for the perfect moment to reveal exactly who had been in control all along.